Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As we kick this off, we're going to be talking more to follow up on this fantastic USMCA panel on the North American advantage. And I can't place any heavier emphasis when I say advantage and opportunities, which is tremendous. So the topic we'll talk about or get into a little bit is more on and it touched a little bit before on integration and being indispensable when it comes to where we are today. Uh, as you heard, my name is Julia Neshwat. I'm a fellow with the Atlantic Council, but I'm also Vice President for Policy and Insights with TC Energy. TC Energy is Calgary based. We work all the way across North America, from Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So with that, I'm joined here today on stage by Mr. Corey Hogan. Corey, you were elected to the Canadian Parliament, Member of Parliament for Calgary Confederation just last spring, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
And in addition to that, I think you're dual-hatted. You've also just been, in addition to being elected, appointed Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. So you are, I'm sure, quite busy these days with that additional hat. And if I'm not mistaken, is this your first visit to Washington as Parliament Secretary?
It is. I used to come to this city a lot in a past life. I used to be a consultant in the energy space, and actually one of my clients was API way back in the day. Yeah, but so I know the city well. I love the city, but this is the first time I've been here in 10 years, and some things are very different and some things are very the same, and it's wonderful to be back.
Excellent, excellent. It's great to have you here today. And just for those who may not understand or know, Corey, you play such, I'd say, the most significant time with what's happening today, with a key role when it comes to advancing Canada and even overall North America, I'd say, energy policies, but in particular, drawing both the private sector and industry, as well as bridging government and communities today. Also, obviously representing your district or riding, if you will, in one of North America's, I'd say, most dynamic energy regions when it comes to Alberta. And again, just bringing that, I'd say, unique perspective, if anything, on how do we integrate North American energy markets that can certainly drive that economic prosperity as well as energy security, which we heard a little bit about earlier. So let's just jump into the questions, if I may, and let's see. Goodness, I mean, there's so much to cover in a little bit of time. Let me see, where's the clock? All right, we're good. We're good to go there. But let's begin with the goal, I'd say, of Canada as an energy superpower. Uh, how would you define that? What does that mean in practice, if anything? And how would one make that a reality, given your role?
Yeah, so when we ran in the last election under Prime Minister Mark Carney, one of the things he talked about was making Canada an energy superpower, both in conventional and renewable. But in many ways, that was a bit of a shift back to saying, yes, it will take all kinds of energy in order for us to address the challenges of the 21st century. And what does that mean? I mean, underneath our feet, in Canada, we have the fourth largest reserves of oil. We're the fifth largest producer of natural gas. We've got 1.4 quadrillion cubic feet of natural gas that's economically recoverable at $2 per MCF. And that's to say nothing of our power in nuclear. That's to say nothing of our strength in solar, in wind, hydro. My goodness, I can't believe that's the end of the list. That is actually our original energy superpower. And it's capitalizing on all of those and creating the environment to capitalize on all of those. So the Prime Minister has been really clear, and he's set with us a direction to make it easier to unlock that opportunity that exists in Canada. And of course, we want to do that for Canadian reasons. I almost said selfish reasons, but Canadian reasons. We want to make sure we're supporting our citizens. But there's also an immense opportunity to think about this on a continental scale. And there's a lot of back and forth and thinking about the times we're in, and obviously between Canada and the U.S. Sometimes it can feel a little strained rhetorically, but of course you are our closest neighbors, and our prosperity is shared, and our continent is shared, and we're stuck with each other either way, and I think that's great because we've been wonderful neighbors to each other over the years.
Absolutely. Well, has then, I'd say, public opinion in Canada changed then over the past year or so when it comes to energy development?
That gets asked a lot, and it even gets kind of asserted a lot that it has changed. But I'll actually tell you, as somebody who's worked in the energy sector and as a deputy minister in Alberta, which is like the energy producing jurisdiction of Canada, and as somebody who also was at a research university, I was vice president at a research university where we looked at these issues a lot. Shout out to the University of Calgary, a really great university for energy research. It hasn't actually changed that much. If you polled going back 15 years, I see my colleague from Parliament, Shannon Stubbs, nodding vigorously. Canadians have always supported energy development, but there had become a bit of a leadership consensus that that wasn't the case. Canadians have actually been pretty consistent on this. They want energy development, they want it done right. Absolutely, no question. They want to make sure that we're moving forward on our climate goals, our environmental goals more broadly. They want to make sure it's done to high labor standards. But the sector also believes that too, and the industry believes that, and that exists. And what I think we're doing is we're unlocking a sentiment that has maybe been a little bit more dormant in Canadian politics over the past 10 years, but is back. Is kind of that pragmatic, middle of the road approach that we Canadians we like to at least try to live to. We don't always, but we try to.
No, that's a great point. Sometimes the messaging gets lost in some of the weeds, if you will, when it comes to those dynamics. But now more than ever, as we see what's happening in the world today, geopolitically in particular, that development and that infrastructure is needed now more than ever again. So that being said, as we heard even in the previous panel and now, I mean, with Canada and U.S. border, more energy flows there than almost anywhere in the world. Our systems are the most deeply integrated globally. So as we look across the globe, you know, again, hearing all these various panels, we've got conflicts. There's geopolitical competition that continues. How do you see the strategic importance, I would say, of this energy integration, especially speaking today with what's happening, and in particular, can we do anything more on infrastructure?
Sure. So listen, as a supplier, like if you're a country or if you're a company, you're thinking about markets. We are so fortunate to have not just the supply, but the world's largest, wealthiest market next door. I mean, that is an incredible advantage for any supplier, and that's an opportunity Canadians would be not well served to pass up. Now, there's no question we have, over the decades, become almost overly reliant on that customer. I'll also say, in no industry of the world would you want 90% of your product going to one customer. So, Canada is absolutely looking to diversify and make sure we have access to global markets in different ways. But this is not an or conversation, this is an and conversation. And we certainly have the capacity with all of those resources I was talking about, all of that natural gas, all of that oil, all of that hydropower, all of that nuclear, to walk and chew gum. We can do multiple. And I think that, well, Canadians don't want to go back to the way it was. We are willing and interested in going forward in productive ways. And one of the ways we can be very productive is in sharing each other's goals on energy and making sure that we can be energy sufficient together and both prosper from that. Certainly, we talk about AI booms, but it's not just AI booms. If you care about climate action, one of the best things you can do is you can electrify. You can electrify industries that were not previously electrified. So that's going to take a certain amount of natural gas. That's going to take hydro. That's going to take nuclear. And there's lots of opportunity there for us to push forward on. And certainly, given the nature of our continent and its north-south integrations, I mean, there's a lot of mountain ranges that are otherwise splitting us. Tons of opportunity. You know, Canada is the largest supplier of the United States of oil. 63% of the oil you import comes from Canada. And I think that's funny because sometimes in a conference like this, you can almost forget that. You hear Venezuela, you hear Saudi Arabia, you hear a lot of countries, and yes, they're large producers too. But nobody provides more than Canada. But to your point earlier, nobody provides more to Canada than the United States. We have a deeply integrated sector, and working together will serve us both.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about energy diversification, both from a supply and source standpoint. I mean, there's so many lessons learned when you think transatlantically with Russia and Europe and so forth, hard lessons learned, but to be able to do that here in North America is critical. Let me turn a little bit to Ottawa, if I may. There's been a big push out of Ottawa to speed up major project approvals in Canada. What reforms or policy approaches is your government pursuing to try to improve that regulatory efficiency?
Well, let's start with where we started, and I'll tell you what we have planned over the next couple of months. One of the first bills that we brought in as a new parliament was a bill to create a major projects office and to create powers that would allow us to approach major projects in what I would argue is a much more rational way. And so, if you think about how we have historically approached regulation in Canada, it's let's just call it for fun four different departments, but it could be far more than four. So you get your fisheries approval, then you get your environment and climate change approval, and then maybe your transportation approval, so on and so forth. And that happens sequentially in almost a waterfall fashion. And that made it slow. And God help you if something happened on step four that kicked you back to step one. It also meant you were engaging with stakeholders at step one, two, three, and four, and there was stakeholder fatigue as well, especially and being very mindful of our First Nations partners. We're being asked to consult a lot on what were fundamentally the same issues. So what we decided made sense as step one of, I want to make sure I don't shortchange step two, is okay, well, let's say if it's a major project, acknowledging major projects everywhere globally, no matter where you are, whether it's Canada, the United States, anywhere, often involve a lot of government intervention in terms of assisting with either public financing or just pointing people towards the right financing, helping with regulations, all that. We'll stand up a major project office. We'll create this power to allow all of those consultations, all of that to happen under one department. Everybody can feed into it and they can happen concurrently rather than sequentially, and we'll get things done faster. Now, there's an obvious flaw with this, which is government then has to determine which projects are major and which ones run faster, right? So, as part of the work, the Prime Minister then also said to the major project office, I want you to tell me what needs to happen to make the overall regulatory environment better, faster, stronger. And they've come back with their first thoughts on that. We released a discussion paper just a couple of weeks ago. It's not legislation yet. We want to hear what people think. But ultimately, what it comes down to is we want to take an approval process that was running 2 to 5 years optimistically, often much longer with those various approvals, and get it down to one. And in that one, we want to make sure that we are doing the kind of political analysis that what we call a governor and council approval, the various things that are more, well, let's call it ephemeral, but or tactical or whatever you want to call it, that will now happen at the start of the process, first quarter. And then within a year, you will get your approval, and then you go. And we just want to fundamentally change how long it takes you to get something built in Canada. And that work will be ongoing. And there's our first thoughts on it. That will turn into legislation in the fall. What that is, we'll wait. We'll have to wait until we get actually to the fall, because of course consultation, or sorry, I should say engagement, consultation having very specific legal considerations. Engagement will occur over the summer, but it's our intention to be the fastest in the OECD. We want you to be able to build faster in Canada than anywhere else.
I think the US can certainly relate to that. It takes us quite a bit of time just to get these projects going, and because of the regulatory barriers and all the red tape to get through. I mean, it's astonishing. China can build up an energy plant in 2 to 3 years, and in the United States can take over a decade. So to see Canada try to do something similar to cut some of that red tape and reform when it comes to those barriers.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear. Like our biggest concerns are pancaking of regulations, pancaking of jurisdictions. This is like zero cost reforms from like a regulatory safety, environmental point of view. We can do the same things better and faster, and there are just practical ways we can uh, approach things when we've said, okay, this is in our interest. How do we do it? Not whether we do it. And that is the big mindset change that we are trying to push throughout the government and frankly throughout Canadian society.
Well, let's hone in on a particular project. Just a year ago, Canada had its first LNG shipment from the LNG Canada facility on the West Coast, which is a direct route to Asia, which, as we all know, is certainly needed now more than ever. And as I understand, the government has recently reevaluated its stance on the production and export of liquefied natural gas, LNG. So has Canada found a new role on LNG? I mean, especially as it relates to energy security?
I think so. And I think it goes back to the word that we try to define our government with, which is practical, right? That we talked about electrification being an opportunity for climate action. You can maybe trade 50 million tons of emissions in energy to save 400 million in industrial sectors. That's a good trade for the planet. Those are the kinds of practical conversations we want to have. So when you talk about LNG, I think that there is certainly appreciation that it is an opportunity to provide both energy security and provide a bridge to kind of more sustainable futures as well. Like one of the projects that was recently approved, and it was approved very quickly, was Silisms, which is a project in northern BC. Now it's still waiting FID. There are still some pieces there, but it will produce natural gas, LNG, I should say, at 94% less carbon intensity than than the standard. That's incredible. And when you start talking about the opportunities that provides across a number of different avenues, that's great. It's also fairly close to Asia. And so there's an opportunity to, and this is a common thread, Canada and the United States working together, but also Canada individually, we can provide energy security. And we can provide it not just on this continent, but in other continents too.
I mean, Canada on the West Coast and the US on the East Coast, and see where that goes, right? Tag
Well,
team.
and the nature of markets is there's swaps that are available. There's ways we can move product, but also, we want to make sure that there are opportunities across the board. Oil and gas is something I'm a Calgarian. I'm going to naturally just fall into that space. But to be clear, it's not just that. It's also hydro. It's also nuclear. We're a tier one nuclear nation. We have a number of nuclear technologies yeah, and by the way, very integrated nuclear industries.
Actually, I was going to be, that was my next question.
Oh, geez,
Was
I'm
on
getting ahead of
nuclear
myself.
supply chain because
Yeah.
we share that very closely. And I didn't realize until recently, Bruce Power is the largest operating nuclear power plant in the world at the moment, and that's in Ontario.
Yeah, and we just did some refurbishments at another plant, and all of them came in under cost, under budget, and under time too, and we are kind of cracking that chestnut in a way. But yes, we have some significant opportunities there, and the integration of nuclear in particular. Like there's Canadian ownership of American companies, American ownership of Canadian companies. We're all sharing research. We're all working together. We have uranium. Obviously, America needs uranium. Like the opportunities there are immense.
Well, I see that we have about 2 minutes left on the clock. Real quickly, I know it's been touched on a little bit here and there, but we can't have an energy panel without talking about AI. So, how is the Canada government looking at AI today?
Well, we just released an AI
About it.
strategy. I mean, one of the things that I think we've all seen, and certainly it's kind of been the subtext of a number of panels, is there are some backlashes to AI, and those backlashes are based on things, sometimes misinformation, sometimes things we can entirely control. Fundamental truth is it is one of those technologies that the productivity gains are so enormous, the opportunity is so enormous. It's not just ChatGPT. It's the way it can help in healthcare. It's the way it can help modernize so many different industries. It is with us. So the question becomes, how do we enable it in ways where we can all benefit and prosper? And I don't want to repeat the great comments of a number of panelists have talked about how AI can actually help support an electricity sector, which I 100% agree with, because it provides, some base demand that allows some modernization of systems. But beyond that, we also have the opportunity through AI, if we do it thoughtfully and right, to make sure that all of us can prosper and the benefit can be broadly shared. And that's something that's really a big piece of our strategy. But the subtext is it will take energy. And natural gas is an obvious source for that. And you see previous comments about 1.4 quadrillion cubic feet. So I think that Canada has a place to play in that. I think that there's a role. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for North America if we work collectively.
And just geographically, I mean, with the need of data centers and the cooling aspect of it, what better natural place than Canada, which has some natural cooling
Naturally
systems?
cold. Yeah.
Naturally cold, exactly. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, besides energy these days, another topic right now is North American soccer. Any predictions? I know Canada has a game this Friday.
Yeah, we do, and I feel like I'd be a poser if I said I had any opinions about it. I'm not like the biggest soccer fan. I'm pretty excited about the Knicks. That's pretty cool. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, actually, I'm a long-suffering Washington Wizards fan. I'm probably a little older than I look. I'm 44, and in the early 80s, mid 80s, late 80s, somewhere in the 80s, uh, the Washington then Bullets had the tallest and the shortest player in the NBA on their team at the same time. And 8-year-old me thought that was awesome. And so, unfortunately, I hitched my start of this wagon. It has been really tough to be a Wizards fan over that time. But yeah, I'm very excited that we're in the NBA Finals. See how I just pivoted to something else on that? There you go.
No, it's great. It's great. Well, please, everyone, let's give a warm thank you and an applaud to Corey Hogan.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure talking to you.
To continue the conversation, integrated and indispensable North America's energy advantage, please welcome back to the stage Vice President, Policy and Insights of TC Energy and Distinguished Fellow Global Energy Center of the Atlantic Council, Dr. Julia Neshwat.
All right, thank you, everyone. Now I really mean it. We're saving the best for last here when it comes to this panel this afternoon. So uh, again, thank you for joining here at the Atlantic Council on this important discussion when it comes to North American energy. As many of you know, and as we heard from the past couple panels, North America certainly stands at such a pivotal moment, if you will, as we certainly possess some of the most abundant and diverse energy resources today, both conventional and unconventional, when it comes to world class talent across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. So I do want to continue on this theme when it comes to integration as well as being indispensable for North America's energy advantage. So as we were just sort of discussing here with Mr. Hogan, North America, again, with all these amazing advantages, world-class operators, deep capital markets, but that advantage is not automatic, right? It depends on whether we can really move across those energy borders. We talked about building infrastructure. How do we maintain that reliable policy framework, deploy that technology, and deliver affordable energy at home, while, of course, supporting our allies abroad? So I am absolutely pleased to be joined by two leaders operating at the heart of the system. We have Clay Gasper, CEO of Devon Energy, a major U.S. shale operator, and Brendan McCracken, President and CEO of Avintiv, one of the largest producers of oil and natural gas in North America, with a focused portfolio in the United States and Canada. So let's just jump into it here. Round one. Well, let's talk a little bit more about, I'd say, defining that North American energy advantage. So I'll divert this question to actually to both of you, as far as sharing, first of all, a little bit about your companies and maybe touch on what exactly is that North American energy advantage. And maybe we'll start with Brandon.
Sure. Yeah, pleased to be here. Look, the North American advantage, I think, sits on a foundation of a blessing of resource. I think it's been well covered already today, so I won't go over that again. But that blessing is then amplified by a highly competitive industry. And I'm so pleased to be here with my good friend Clay, who is also one of our competitors. And, we'll compete fiercely on the playing field here. And that fuels a real engine of innovation that has driven a really creative approach to identifying and then producing those resources and delivering the independent North America that we have today. So Ovintiv's history, actually, origin story dates back into Canada. Today we're an American company, but the origin story dates back over 140 years to the Canadian Pacific Railroad. And as the railroad was being built across Western Canada, they were drilling for water as they went. And they accidentally discovered natural gas, which was really the first natural gas discovery in Canada, was trying to drill for water. And so that abundant resource made itself available to us very early on. Fast forward to today, we have a portfolio in West Texas in the Permian and in a play called the Montney in Canada. We produce around 600,000 barrels a day, focused on medium oil in West Texas and light oil in Western Canada.
Excellent. And Clay.
Yeah, so I love this industry. I'm dedicated to energy my entire career. And I think one thing unique about our industry is just what Brandon was talking about, this competitive yet collegial relationship. We're in each other's wells, we co-invest, we do research projects together. There's a lot of partnership along with that competition that I think it just makes us all so much better. Devon's story originates about 55 years ago. A young 55.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. But we started in a very small play in northwest New Mexico, and our journey's taken us kind of around the world and back. Today we are in 6 different basins around the United States, and we entirely focus on horizontal drilling in resource plays, shale wells, very tight, hard to produce wells that we believe we've got a great expertise. When we think about the future of energy, there's no doubt about it. North America has tremendous continued resource, but we also think about the opportunities that are around the globe and exploiting some of these same opportunities, these hard to kind of crack the code opportunities that I think the US and the Canadian companies have a significant amount of uh, experience, and we'll be able to export that over time and help our friends and neighbors around the globe exploit those resources as well.
Fantastic. I have to say, while the political will is there, both United States and Canada, it's having that momentum and building that in this exciting time, and it can't be done if you don't have the private sector pushing that through with that on the ground experience. So it really does matter quite a bit. Let's now turn maybe to you, Brandon, first. When it comes to integrated flows and tariffs and just the whole U.S. Canada system, which we touched on earlier, one of the most, I'd say, tangible examples of North American integration is that actual physical flow of energy between both countries, whether it's Canadian gas, it's crude, it's condensate, it's natural gas liquids, refined products, as well as like electricity, all move across the border every day. And you certainly see that in your business every day. So what would you say, especially with this last year and a half has, as it told us about integration, maybe are there any examples? I mean, is there a vulnerability when it comes to those systems overall?
Yeah, if you think about the integrated energy system between Canada and the United States, it's the most integrated market in the whole world. It's worth, on the energy side alone, about $150 billion a year. Um, the headline level, of course, is the U.S. is energy independent. And I think we heard from Mr. Hogan before this. There's actually a lot of swapping and trading that's happening underneath the hood to kind of make that top line claim work, and a lot of that is coming from Canada. The U.S. imports about 40% of its oil every day. It also exports an equivalent volume of oil and product, but most of that imported oil is coming from Canada. A lot of that Canadian oil is bitumen. We don't produce any bitumen. We're light oil producers in Canada. But that bitumen product is blended with light oil that comes from the Gulf Coast and round trips its way back to the US Midwest and Gulf Coast refineries. On natural gas, roughly 10% of US natural gas consumption every day comes from Canada, largely in the Pacific Northwest and California. And then again on electricity, a lot of that electricity is round tripping itself either from hydro projects in Canada South or from gas generated um, power in Washington State going north. And so the integrated system as it stands today is a marvel of the modern world. Nowhere else in the world do two countries cooperate in that way. And while that's amazing and terrific, it does have some vulnerabilities. And one of the things that we're watching closely is the USMCA renegotiation that's up this summer to be revisited, and those early conversations have begun. And energy today is exempt from tariffs. So all the headline tariffs that you hear about in the U.S. and retaliatory in Canada have exempted energy, which is very important and critical that continue, and really critical that they ultimately get resolved in the renegotiation of the trade agreement.
Excellent. And Clay, following on that, I'm glad you mentioned USMCA a little bit there. From a U.S. producer perspective, how should we think about the Canadian U.S. energy as, we tend to think about competition, but really as complementary to each other, if anything, as opposed to a competing source of supply. So how would you see that as complementary?
Well, I think Brendan said it very well that when we think about that literal blending of the barrels, I think that's kind of the most obvious and necessary interaction. When we think about the way our refineries are configured and the type of oil that they really relish or are built around Venezuelan crude and some other heavier crudes. And now in the U.S., most of the oil that we produce is actually a very light, intermediate to West Texas light type crude. So that blending really helps both products get to the right market and therefore get refined into products that we can more beneficially use.
then, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, is it safe to say that North America is stronger when we treat energy security as more of a continental system, not just a domestic production?
Yeah, I'll go with stronger. I like that.
Stronger? Okay. Very good. Very good. All right. Well, let's turn to more about supply outlook and capital discipline. I'll start with you again, Brandon. Ovintiv has effectively really, I'd say, concentrated, as you noted earlier, on Montney, but also the Permian. How do you think about where North American shale is in its development cycle? And as operators certainly move from the very best rock into more varied inventory, what matters most for their production?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. It's probably the single most important question before Iran. It was the question that industry's really been wrestling with for the last, call it 3, 4 years, is where are we at in the maturity cycle of shale? And the punchline answer, I'll give away the answer before I kind of explain it a bit, is I think we're in the seventh inning. But because of strong companies like Devon and Ovintiv, we're replaying the seventh. We seem to be able to kind of get back and replay the top of the seventh every couple of years here. And so if I back up and explain what I mean by that for a moment, if you look at the long arc of the oil and gas industry, 100 plus years, there's always been a play type that's dominated, a play type that's been the low cost winner globally. It's been the place where growth has come from. And for the last 20 plus years, that's been shale. It's been North American shale has been that dominant player. And that's actually, if you look back through that arc of history, an abnormally long period of time to be in the dominant seat. If we walk back even just through the last few decades, the 80s were really the decade of Alaska. And I know in the other room we had the governor. Alaska's getting a renaissance, which is awesome, but production in Alaska peaked at the end of the 80s. 90s was the former Soviet Union countries becoming available to Western technology and innovation and drove a big spike of production from those resources. And then the 2000s was really the advent of deep water. The Gulf of America switched on, North Sea switched on, and those plays peaked towards the end of the 2000s. And then really after that, it's been shale. And so we're into this phase here now where it's getting a little long in the tooth. But really, this innovation capability is what's driving the future. And so, our two companies are at the forefront of this. I always like to say, if you're like a high school baseball player, you want to know, can I hit a major league curve? I think it's the congressional baseball game tomorrow, so members of Congress are gonna duel it out. They're probably not going to see a major league curve in the baseball game tomorrow, but that's the test, the standard, right? Well, I think if you're an oil company today, you want to try and play in the Permian. That's the equivalent of finding out, can I hit a major league curve or not? And our two companies lead in the Permian there. And so this innovation capability is going to allow North America to continue to be at the forefront of the global energy dynamic, but we need some help, right? So we can do as much as we can on the innovation side. The big challenge is we need to be able to get our products to market efficiently. And the pieces that we need in place to do that are permitting reform. It's a big issue actually in both countries. It's an issue Congress is grappling with today. And it's also an issue I think you heard from Mr. Hogan earlier that Canada is grappling with as well. And we also need to not have tariffs. These artificial barriers to our energy products reaching market are going to be the catalyst that cause shale to come off of that front end of the curve, and we don't want that. So I think that's the way to think about where shale's at today.
Great point on the permitting reform. In fact, we ran out of time. I wanted to ask Mr. Hogan, just like the U.S. created an energy dominance council, but maybe Canada might think of something similar like that could help bypass or expedite some of these permits overall.
They've got a major projects office. Just I'll answer
Okay.
for Mr. Hogan.
Thank you.
Yeah, they've created which we love. But we're also fans of, then taking the principles and values that the Major Projects Office is delivering and permanently putting those into legislative policy going forward.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Clay, I just wondered if you share the same views as it sounds like you do with Brandon, in particular with Devon emerging from the Coterra merger with more scale and I guess a broader multi-basin portfolio, if you will. What does that allow you to do that maybe you couldn't do before?
Well, I think scale is important, and I agree. I think you know, the high strokes of the evolution that we were just talking about, I think is exactly right. And I had the pleasure of living through some of those waves. But I also think about, you know, the old adage, the best place to find oil is where you found oil before. And I think about a place like the Permian Basin, where in the 1960s it was having a heyday, and it was done about the 1970s or so. We kind of rolled over, and then back in the 80s again, there was a little bit of a wave and kind of a falling off. First time I worked the Permian was in the late 90s, and this was a old, very tired oil fields that felt a rejuvenation around water floods. And so you're taking these old primary fields and re-injecting water back into the rock and sweeping it. The initial recovery factors were 15% or so on this primary recovery. There was a mechanism to go recover maybe another 10%. And then the innovation continued from there, and CO2 entered the play. And you now are injecting CO2. And again, grabbing the oil molecules from this rock and stripping it from this rock and getting another 5, 10%, you know, kind of rejuvenating these amazing, semi-tired, but truly amazing fields. What we had to leave behind were all of these shales in between these sandstones and big porous rocks. Somewhere along the way, brilliant people in our industry figured out how do you extract the oil from these shales. And that's really the early 2000s and teens and what we're benefiting from today. But what we haven't figured out quite yet, at least from an economic standpoint, is how do we apply some of those same technologies, these enhanced oil recoveries? How do we re-enter these fields? We estimate that we recover about 10% of the oil in any given resource play, plus or minus. Think about the recovery. If you've already invested in the land, invested in the infrastructure, you may even have wells that you can re-enter. You've certainly got all the facilities and all of the surface equipment to go re-inject CO2, natural gas, even solvents, surfactants. We're trying a lot of these opportunities to go wring out a little bit more from this amazing rock. And you think about the most amazing basin we both work is in the Permian, and you think about just driving that recovery factor a little bit more. We have smart people working on these things every day, showing really good promise. And I would say promise on the technology front. Some of those are actually showing promise on the economic front, but that gets me really excited about kind of what's next in this space. Now, above and beyond that, there are resources around the world that I think have real opportunity to benefit from the experience that we've been using over the last couple of decades here. And that also gets me pretty excited about what's next for energy.
Absolutely. It is very much an exciting time. If I could just shift real quickly so I can make sure we're still good on time here, maybe we can talk a little bit about market access and maybe a little bit on infrastructure bottlenecks. So the Montney, as you noted earlier, is one of North America's most important gas and liquids resources, but Canada has historically faced maybe some constraints along the way getting that energy to the global markets, as you noted. So we talked about this earlier, but what really needs to happen for Western Canadian gas to play, I'd say maybe a larger role for LNG, energy security, and even allied supply?
Yeah. So we built a really successful and valuable business in Canada by focusing on the only premium energy product in Canada, which is condensate, which is a very light oil. And it's a premium product because it's used to blend with the bitumen to get the bitumen to market. Now, the byproduct we produce in Canada is natural gas. And so my joke with my CFO, and he hates it when I say it like this, is we produce a lot of gas. We produce 2 BCF a day of gas in the two worst gas markets in the world, um, West Texas and Western Canada. And so fortunately, our commercial people are much more smart and talented than Corey and I are, and they've found a way to diversify our sales away from those two basins. But today, just as an example, I looked at the prices on the screen this morning, so they're a little dated, hours dated. We're going to sell 2 BCF a day. I'm going to sell some of it at global LNG prices, which is awesome. So that's $19 a unit. We're going to sell a bunch of it at NYMEX price, which is a little over $3 today. We're going to sell a little bit of it for my sins in Western Canada at $1.25. And then I'm going to sell a little bit of it again in West Texas for -$3. That is insane. That is bad for my shareholders, but it is even worse for our two countries. That type of arbitrage is not a healthy market, and it only exists because we've been terrible, and this is actually a shared challenge, both sides of the border. We've been terrible at building linear infrastructure. And so that's why the earlier comments around permitting reform, but it's really a recognition that these are jobs, this is capital investment, this is GDP growth that's really going out the door. I mean, the World Cup's going to start, I think, this weekend. So if I steal a soccer term, this is an own goal, right? We did this to ourselves. The good news is we have the resource. So we have the power to undo this and reset the economic setup and be able to capture that GDP in our two economies instead of letting it leak away. And so this is something we're really passionate about, and the gas is just one example of that. That's happening really on all products across North America.
It's a great point on the condensates. I mean, most people don't really understand how important that is to integrate that with our North American energy system. So, Clay, and then you have Devon's expanded portfolio as well that includes major U.S. Oil and gas basins. That's Delaware, Marcellus. So, how do you see U.S. shale gas fitting into the next phase of LNG growth, and as well as power demand and also allied energy security?
Yeah, so the merger we just did, you mentioned earlier, was with Coterra. And so Coterra brought um, Marcellus, which is one of the best U.S. Gas production areas, to the portfolio, along with a really complementary asset in our crown jewel assets, with their crown jewel assets in the Delaware side of the Permian Basin. Very different markets. And so in the Marcellus, Northeast U.S. desperately needs more gas. It's a very cyclical market, though. It's still hard to build that infrastructure, supply the desperate need, even when it's one state over sometimes. We need to get better at that. I completely agree. When I look to West Texas in the Permian Basin, it's really it's disappointing. And I think about the incredible resources we have there, and then the desperate needs for natural gas around the planets. You know, the only disconnect is the infrastructure. And so making sure that we have the ability to get it to the coast, turn it into liquefied natural gas, and then ship it to the needs around the planet are things that we need to work on. I think what in Devon's view, one of the things that we really are focused on is when we see one of these critical needs, if you can see it ahead of others, a lot of times you can either own the constraint or you can optimize or build around that. We've been very aggressive in the midstream space to really partner up and really unlock that. But I can tell you, it's a real challenge. You know, it is not something you snap your fingers and
Yeah.
unlock the potential on.
Is there something domestically that can be done, in your opinion, that could help with these constraints at this
Well,
point?
it starts just with the permitting reform. And so the ability for us to put pipe in the ground when there is more pipe than there is roads on the on the surface.
Sure.
There are that many pipes underground, but we still act like it's the first time we've ever done this. It's an amazing opportunity for us to connect the dot from this world-class resource to the Gulf Coast, and then get serious about LNG construction and exporting. And that puts us in an incredible position as a country to help peers and friends around the world.
And as I asked Corey Hogan in the last session, we can't have an energy panel without talking about AI. So I'd like to get a feel for how your companies respectively are putting AI to use when it comes to enhancing your operations.
Yeah, I mean, we're pursuing 4 different channels of AI utilization in the company. The first one is safety. So working safely is an important value at our company, and this technology has a lot of potential to transform how we work, and in particular has a lot of utility around safe work. One of the places we're most excited about the technology today is it helps really challenge human bias. And we're all subject to this, whether that's like an overconfidence bias, The technology can really come in and help identify hazards that as humans we just grow numb to. And so we're excited about deploying it there. The second category is the one you hear about in every magazine article and online blog post, which is the digital labor piece of this. We're engaged there, but if you take my people costs are something like 5% of total revenue. So compare that to many other industries that are maybe 50, 60, 70% people cost in their margin structure. It's just, we're going to work on it, but it's not going to be a strategic transformation on the digital labor side of things. The third category is the one that we're really excited about from a business performance and earnings potential perspective. We call that complex problems. So Clay talked about, hey, how do we wring more oil out of this incredible rock that, as good as it is, we're only getting like 10% of the oil out of it. That's a complex problem that AI is going to be really powerful in helping us solve and is already powerful today. Another example in that space, we run all our drilling rigs today on AI. I call them the world's largest industrial robots. So they're making decisions. The AI model is queuing decisions. We still got a human in the loop, but they're queuing decisions every day and setting records, routinely setting records based on the performance of the technology. The fourth category is on cyber defense, which is one where you just need to be in the game there because the bad guys are. So those are the four ways we're using AI today at Ovintiv.
On the third one, could that help then expand the shale runway?
100%. I think it's already happening. Um, I mentioned the AI controlled robots that are the drilling rigs, but we're doing the same on our frac spreads. And it's really hard when you drill a well. It's really hard to make the well more productive by drilling it better. It's really a cost game on drilling. But on completions, it's both a cost game and a productivity and recovery game. And so all of our completions are done with real-time AI queuing that is driving not only the cost down, but is also helping enhance our recovery up. And we make the highest productivity oil wells on the Midland side of the basin. Clay's on the Delaware, so it's okay. We're not going to have a fight.
Central Basin Platform
Yeah,
sits right
separates
here.
us up. Yeah, it's like two brothers, and Dad's got the arm keeping them apart in the back seat.
Oh.
But yeah, I think a lot of that has been driven by the innovation over the last few years, and in no small part by our efforts around AI.
No, and I know, Clay, you've spoken publicly about how AI is something that can really transform how an operator uses data, makes decisions, and as well as improve performances also. So where is AI most real today inside an upstream company?
Well, I'm watch out because we could go really long on this section. I
Fair
love this
enough.
stuff.
I think we've got
I think
minutes.
I think what's really interesting about AI is a challenge and an opportunity. And I think, we're energy providers. So the big thing that AI needs is energy. And so how do we provide more energy? I really think AI is part of the solution. When I rewind back, November of 22, ChatGPT came out. Soon after that, we're really pushing the organization. How do we leverage this? How do we use this? Before we probably had a real good feel of the risks involved. um, Circa May of 23, we stood up our first chat DVN. And so this was a fully firewall protected inside system where we unleashed all of the data and started training everyone in the organization on how to access this data. And we started this kind of first wave. And so this is probably how most of us use um, large language models today. It's accessing the data more fluidly in more real time than we've ever had before. We had this philosophy that our engineers were probably using 70% of their day, 75% of their day finding data, and 25% actually analyzing the data. The first goal was flip-flopping that. We need 25% searching, 75% actually using, and you're tripling the productivity of these incredibly valuable folks. That's kind of wave one. We've updated ChatDVN a couple of times now, state of the art. What we're doing and leveraging a lot on is what we call wave two, where you think about these complex tasks that we do, multiple people in the loop on figuring out how do we do this. And some of these things are either these tasks can be redundant or they can be very complex in data sourcing, calculating, and critical pieces. How do you speed that process up? Now, today, we have AI that's part of the team. AI is an integral part of that flow. We're calling that kind of wave two. And what we're working towards, we have a couple of teams that are there now, is wave three, where you actually have full autonomy inside of AI. We have artificial lift optimization going on in the wells right now, that these very complex real time calculations are happening 24/7. We have over 850 wells fully autonomously operated by AI, with ambitions of all of our wells headed that way. It's an amazing value creation opportunity, because one of the things that we see, it's you get the big cost up front. You're getting that initial production rate. You're thinking about the marketing and the infrastructure and all that build out, but sometimes that later life, the 2 year, 5 year, 10 year well isn't getting as much attention. By doing this real time 24/7 babysitting, we're seeing a real significant uplift for minimal cost that has a very material bottom line impact. So, really excited about AI and kind of where it goes from here.
Absolutely. I think we've got, let's see, one minute.
Flashing.
We're flashing. Okay. Okay. Well, last quick lightning round, both of you. What is the most pressing need for North America to fully realize its energy advantage?
I mean, I think it's if we're continuing on in the spirit of the conversation, we're going to do our part on innovation to drive our ability to get that next, percent of recovery factor out of these wells, and we need the open playing field to allow investment to flow into those projects, and that includes connecting resources to market, and but it also includes making sure we can continue to work cooperatively across the border.
Yeah, along those lines, innovation, investment hates uncertainty. And what we can do to take out some of that uncertainty really unleashes innovation and unleashes the investment. We've got the resource, we've got the capable people. Just unleash them to deliver the energy that we need and alloys around the world need, I think is an amazing opportunity for us.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both very much. Let's give a round of applause for our panelists.
This concludes the first day of the Atlantic Council's 10th Global Energy Forum. The sessions will resume tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. on the energy stage. Thank you for attending, and a good evening to you all.